Black Shining Leather, the debut album by Carpathian Forest, a legendary Norwegian black metal band that was one, among others, of the first wave of Norwegian black metal, that is, generally speaking, the second wave. So this time it's all about a classic release, one that definitely divides people into different camps, that is, not exactly worshipped all around, generally speaking, but some people praise it, some people don't like it so much. Me? Well, let's find out about it. Now, when I heard Carpathian Forest the first time, it was late 90s. Can't really exactly remember the first year, first time, and so forth, but I remember among those were, for example, Bloodlust and Perversion, the demo tape, and of course this EP that was more praised, called Through Chasm Caves and Titan Woods. And also Black Shining Leather was there, supposedly making waves, even though, technically speaking, compared to a lot of other Norwegian bands, came a little bit late to the party, as late as 1998. Now, today it might seem a little bit odd to say it was late to the party, I mean it was still 90s. But let's face the facts, a lot of Norwegian bands made waves with their debut albums, even second albums, by 1995 or so. So coming to 1998, it was like almost like, hey, you're coming for a new wave and all that stuff. But Carpathian Forest had always been something different than your typical Norwegian bands. That is, I'm dropping names like Mayhem, Immortal, Emperor, Burzum, Darkthrone. Most of them were kind of, especially in hindsight, rather traditional with their takes, especially, Mayhem, coming basically between the first and second wave. Let me elaborate on that. I mean, when we are not talking about Bathory, Celtic Frost, Venom, etc., we're talking about the coming of the 90s. But Mayhem was before that, and their music was, of course, kind of paving the road for a lot of other Norwegian bands. But Burzum went in one direction, Ember totally opposite, Immortal somewhere in between, coming to the fast lane and all that stuff, and Darkthrone went for their raw end. So where does leave Carpathian Forest? Not exactly doing the next enslaved thing, but, waving their middle fingers in all directions. So kind of a raw end and cruder, much like Darkthrone, but definitely not symphonic like Emperor, not melodic and sinister like Mayhem debut, but something different. So while there is a lot of Darkthronian elements on Black Shining Leather, it's still something quite different. And this is something I've tried once again to understand after so many years of not listening to the album. And by understanding I mean giving it a fresh pair of ears after having been listening to it for ages, even though I had the album already more than 20 years ago. I don't have it anymore, mind you, if you're asking that. Black Shining Leather is not, in my opinion, as good of an album as the second one, Strange Old Brew, which I have already reviewed on the channel before. Why I decided to go with this one was actually my own Carpathian Forest interview in 2017 done at Steelfest, which kind of brought up maybe I should revisit some of the older Carpathian Forest, especially when they're coming to Finland once again in 2023, that is, unless I'm mistaken or misinformed. So I decided to go for this album I haven't touched like for an eternity now, and gave it quite a few listens. And in my opinion, this is an interesting album, but not also a very good one for the following reasons. First of all, it is full of up and downs. Those ups are the ones that actually make a lot of sense, being Carpathian Forest very like in very peculiar ways, I guess, but also because they have the strong punch, the different kind of a punch, the dirtier, kind of a muddier kind of a punch than so many other bands that have ever since become more clean and nice. Now, I'm not necessarily talking just bands like the Satyricon or Dimmu Borgir, even though they are, once again, very different from Carpathian Forest was doing. But meanwhile, a lot of bands kind of cleaned up their style, becoming more melodic and becoming generally more likable. One could even make a statement saying more mainstreamish. In terms of black metal, Carpathian Forest were always like rather rebellious with their style. And this rebellious is very much present with the debut album for the following reasons. First of all, And let's start with the end. It's not exactly the way to start the album, obviously, but it's a good point what I'm talking about. While all the other songs pretty much are either atmospheric black metal or just kind of a cruder and more violent kind of stuff, the album is ended with the Cure cover, A Forest, which is, in my opinion, still one of the best covers ever done by a metal band. Especially when we're talking about songs that are not originally metal. It's a beautiful cover version of a good song, and it kind of shows that these guys have, or at least had, a lot of vision for things how to be done rather unusual way when it comes to black metal. The rest of the album is filled indeed with ups and downs. First of all, it starts with the title track, which is, after a short intro, kind of a violent and very crude stuff. And by crude I mean the snare sound is so kind of uptight, you can almost feel it crack there. The bass is always very much present. I mean the bass guitar, not the drums so much. And it's kind of a clanking sound, making this album sound so much different than a lot of other black metal albums, not only Norway, but in usual ways. And also the great vocals. In my opinion, Carpathian Forest has one of the better set of black metal vocalists, because it's raw, it's not kind of unapologetic, and it's violent, inhuman, all that stuff. One of the reasons why I actually like Darkthrone and Satyricon vocals so much as well. Very, very raw and powerful. Not like raw, but not exactly having the power, which is the case with some vocalists, or vice versa. But Carpathian Forest vocals have it all. And the guitar riffs, well, they are really something. Sometimes it's kind of a trashy, like in the beginning. There are parts which are almost like black trash. Not exactly aura noir, but still. And then there are riffs which are just plain black metal, the Norwegian style, very, very 1990s. But the deeper and farther you go with the album, you pretty much figure out that after the first tracks, there are parts where it gets almost atmospheric, like soft. And while this creates great diversity in terms of songwriting and interest for the album, there are lots of parts where it feels almost like it's not that interesting. Then again, there are really good atmospheric parts like In Silence I Observe, which is then again a kind of a soothing but very, very dark title. A song. And it's like comforting to see that this band is very skilled, even though it sometimes feels like the whole album is like all over the place. It's as if you had this big box of Lego bricks. You turn upside down the whole box and just scatter the blocks in various places. And then you start looking at this motherfucker, figuring out like what the hell I'm supposed to do with this bunch of bricks. Eventually you will build something. And in Carpathian Forest's case, well, that's Black Shining Leather. Filled with really nice ideas, but also filled with little kind of a gimmicks or weird ideas like, what the hell is this supposed to be? Well, I'm gonna include it anyway. That seems to be the message with Black Shining Leather. So unlike Stranger Brew, which is way more consistent and overall better quality, Black Shining Leather is filled indeed with ups and downs. The parts where you're like, yeah, this is nailing it. This is dirty. This is kicking down the doors. This is not, doing apologies, not trying to be this kind of a liked black metal album. This is not some kind of a sophisticated thing, but the quite opposite, yet without being super raw and primitive black metal like Ilian or Surt Vokter from Norway. So it stands among the crowd like Darkthrone, but being more wicked and more kind of a weirder and also kind of dirtier, as if it's having a weird grin on its face, much like Loki, the trickster god in Norwegian mythology. Kind of a nice person, but it's still something unexpected, surprising one who might be an asshole the 1 minute and the really nice guy the next. That's part of the appeal, for me anyway, with Carpathian Forest. They are not the nicest guy band. I mean, the interview which I did kind of tells you the opposite, but I'm feeling about the dangerous feeling what the band is doing, and I think it's wonderful. However, Black Shining Leather is too much having those down moments versus the up ones, in my opinion, to be really good of an album. I will say this much though, there are lots of good parts, and if only those were included, maybe cutting the album by 1/3, this would be a really good album. This could be actually the best album by the band, but it's not. And overall I would say, yes, it's definitely decent. It's most definitely a very interesting album, but it has those moments, which is the reason I guess some reviewers are gonna put it down like it's not that good. It's kind of a mediocre or lukewarm or whatever you want to call it. I think it's still partially having the charm it used to have back in the 90s and still very, very much deserving attention. So this shall be the classic of this week for Rauta. An interesting album that has many phases, many different aspects, but not all the way good, all the way down anyway. I strongly recommend you to check it out or revisit it if you have listened to it before, but not lately. An interesting thing, and I will link my own interview with the band to this video, so in case you want to go and see how it was in 2017, you will figure it out. Thanks for watching the classic review. Should you have recommendations or suggestions for a classic review, let me know. Meanwhile, take care and listen to some good shit.